Hello everyone. So it's Leila again. I am going to discuss in this lecture something very important actually about the function, methodology, and built-in function, mass function, and also different type of the function, how you can use them, how you can join them to the class and objects, and so on. So let's look at the previous subject. First of all, do the recap, and then we're gonna move to the next lecture. So as you know, we went through the Java, how to use Java in Eclipse, and then we went to the problem solving, and then explaining that what is the flowchart, pseudocode, algorithm, and then we talk about variables, how to declare them, and then if then else, conditional statement, and then loop, for loop, and array. And now we're gonna look at the object and classes and how we can monitor, call function or method in a Java programming. So there are some more resources that you can look at those based on the different documentation of Java. There are a huge amount of the useful code and tutorial about the Java, so that you can find it in this link, and also more that I'm gonna share it with you later on. So have you ever think that what is a function? Yeah, function is actually has different meaning in different situation. So for example, if you want to apply some method, for example, some mass function, you might have used them before in your math, but right now in programming you need to use a function to be able to actually get the final outcome of a function. So this subject gonna be very useful in terms of the engineering and programming subject, but I wish that this subject gonna help you, and then feel free to ask me any question regarding this lecture. So yeah, so in terms of the context of the programming function is a predefined self-contained program that performs a set task. So for each individual task, you need to create a new function. In Java, there are thousands of functions that called through objects and methods, and then there are different functions getting different type of values or parameters or arguments, and then some of the function return some value, some of them they don't, they don't return anything, and they are known as a void function. And then we're gonna look at the different selection of methodology to see how we can apply a function and why we use a function. So as we mentioned earlier, so functions are a predefined task. For a particular job, we define a function. We want to organize our program. We want to say each method, each part, how they behave, and then in the data structure with dividing and providing different kind of function, there we gonna be able to have a better plan for dynamic programming, to improve your code, to change it, and more. So some of the functionality of the methods or function are writing instead of writing hundreds of lines of Java code, someone maybe done this part of the job for you. I mean, you can easily find many codes which are gonna do the same thing as what you wish to do. So actually, the only thing you need is just do a proper research, as I always mention. So yeah, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So we don't want to waste our time. We're gonna use other people contribution, and we're gonna help them. We're gonna share the code, they're gonna share the code, and then we're gonna communicate in this matter. So yeah, so there are some built-in function for programming different programming languages, and of course for Java as well, that they're gonna help us to avoid to writing any single method or function for applying a single job or task. So what are the side effects of the function? The side effects is where a function does more than just return a value. So look at this particular example in here. So as you can see, there is we're using system.out.println to have some kind of output, right? But is that this function is for providing facility for the computer to be able to interact with the hardware. So it's better to use the function instead of just every time we say, we explain to computer how you can get access to different parts of the hardware and what you need to do. So it's better to define some system function, system.out, for example, for communicating with the hardware, and then we can have a simple method assigning to this. Then we need to just call this to be able to talk to the hardware and say, please represent something in the string, right? So basically, there are two different type of Java methods that we're gonna go through in this lecture and in the next lecture. So what we're gonna talk in this lecture is the standard library methods, like what we said about the println, like different mass. And then, for example, if you remember, we talked about the array size, and we said we can call length. So length is some of these standard function that we can use it. And user defined is when you want to do something, so you prefer to write a piece of code and assign that to a function, and then whenever you need that, you just call it. By changing the parameter and the input and output, you can just reuse it and you don't need to apply it again. So here I want to give you an example about the function to see that how we can work with the function. So if we look at the, if I want to sorry. So yeah, for example, if I want to write something in here for you, for example here. So here is a piece of code that you need to write it in Java or any other languages to be able to perform something. Can you guess what is that? So the main function gonna be that is implemented in this code gonna be this one, which is so I mean the function x to the power of 2 is implemented by using this methodology. So is that correct? So for example, if x is 2, then f2 gonna be 4. If x is 3, then x3 gonna be 9. So this is a particular, it is a sample for you to understand that why we are using function. So actually to be able to do something like to increase some number to the power of the something else. So for example, we need to write this piece of code in computer. So I just move this here, and then we are good to go. So class and object methods. So I just get rid of these, please. Yeah. So yeah, all right. So for using to being able to use the class and object methods, so we are gonna write some kind of function and methods, and then we're gonna call them class methods and object methods. Let's have a quick review and recap of whatever we learned. So by using the different method in a class, you are being able to provide some basic programming earlier, but in here we're gonna look at different kind of the function. As you can see, the function in here are listed, and then the explanation or description are provided. So we do have some string function or methods. For example, for the characters, so if you want to return a character at a given index, then you need to use this. Sometimes you need to compare some string to another one. For example, you want to see that if the user inserted the right name, you want to compare it with the predefined and default name. So you need to be able to use a function, a built-in function in Java which is compared to. Unless that we talk about this earlier, if you want to find out what is the size of an array so how many different elements you are allowed to use or obtain in an array, so you're going to use lambs. And then replace all the split and substring to lowercase. You can convert the case of a string to lower or uppercase. And then sometimes you need to find, for example, if you got a string, so yeah, you want to find the value of this string, so you can use this methodology. So whatever I want to just explain is related to the object-oriented subject that you learned earlier. Similarly, in programming, a function is a block of code that performs a specific task. So the same thing in object-oriented method are used for function. Methods are bound to a class and they define the behavior of a class. So, and we're going to use the following manner to explain it. So look at this syntax. This is the syntax that you need to use to be able to declare a function and assign it to a variable. So here, if you want to use any math function like square root, like power, multiplication, or anything, you need to say math dot, for example, square, math dot power, or anything else. And if you need to have some input parameter, then you need to provide it in here, and all together gonna be assigned to a variable that at the end you're gonna return it in a function. So we're gonna look at this again in more detail, so don't worry for now. So most of the methods are class method. So we do have a class method that they are very useful, and actually we can run the data by using those functions, and we can use power logs and constants. So if you want to see the math function of the more like for the calculating some mathematical problem, so you need to use this string function method, which the description are provided in here. So this is pi, e, and then you need to have different kind of the function, math function, to be able to calculate different part of problem. So you have min, max, log, power, square root, and so on. All right, so right now I'm gonna go a little bit in deeper level inside the function and the system command. So the following is an example of a system command for using function. So let's take a look at that. So we do say calendar date calendar dot get instance. Do you remember what is that? Is it something that you know it? So yeah, here is an object that is just based on the factory. We're gonna look at this. That we're gonna say that how we define it. Actually, so the standard library method are built-in method in Java that are available to use, something like date and calendar. I'm gonna tell you how we can define them, but what you need to know about this example in here is that how you can actually provide some function and then you to be able to use it within the main or other classes in the Java programming. So here is just explanation that how you can use it. So here is a calendar dot get instance. So get instance is one of the method inside the calendar that you are calling this method or function to be able to assign a value to date. Next one, you are printing some methods within date. So right now you create an object from the class calendar. So right now you are calling a method of the object and instance of the calendar, which is getTime. So you can ask the system to provide you with the exact date time by using this facility. And then you're gonna say, all right, so once you use that, when you got the date, whatever is the type of that value that you provided, I want to convert it to a string. So then you're going to call another function or method, which is the system method built-in function and is known as toString. So another one, you're going to print something date.get calendar.year. So do you remember about the getter and setter? So here you're gonna just call get to be able to get something from the class. What is that? Just year. So because the calendar format gonna be year, months, week, day, minutes, hours, second, and so on. And then you can say, so you're gonna call another method within the object of date that produce the same result of whatever we're using here. So look at I would really recommend you to type in this piece of code and try to see that if you really get the same result. So the result should be printed as you can see in here. So by running these two, so you need to be able to get the same result as this one. So let's look at the next part. So sometimes you need to use some kind of methods and function to be able to provide some information about the time. So you would say that system.currentTime is assigned to a variable which is before, and then you say after this initialization, do something. Say after is current time and system. So you want what you're gonna do, and then you print after subtracted by before. So what you want to do by writing this piece of code is actually you are telling the Java, give me the time I spent it to run this piece of code, whatever you written in here. For example, you have a for loop, you have some kind of coding in here, and you want to see, you want to compare that how long does it take to run this piece of code comparing to the other. And so as I mentioned earlier, so computer can actually generate random numbers by using some built-in function like rand and more. So this function actually is mainly used in many applications like games, simulation, artificial intelligence, and more, and in the math and finance. So let's take a look at the next one. So for example, here you can see an example of the random number built-in function that you want to call it and use it within your Java program. So you need sometimes, for being able to use different system function or built-in function to be able to call it, you need to import a library, because all of these functions like round, mass function, they are stored in different library. You need to be able to use them easily. However, you can just simply say import java.util.random. By using this import command and something in here, which is different for any different kind of library. For math is different, for for example, for different part of the finance and accounting, you have different part. For printing, you do have different. For scanning, you do have different import, different library to import, and then so on. So before being able to use random, which is a built-in function within Java, you need to import the library of the random. So here you say new random, and then you put it into an object variable in here. And then next time, you're gonna call another method within this object, which you created from random class, right? So within a loop, what you're gonna do actually, so you are generating several different random number and a value between the integer mean value and integer max value. So because you say how many times? 5 times you need to apply this. By applying this, you're gonna get different result, because actually the random function gonna provide and generate different numbers each time, but you can test it and see that how it works. Okay, so again, I'm gonna do another revision or whatever we went through earlier, because I do believe that is very important, and you need to be able to grasp the concept correctly. So as you can see in here, we want to define a class methods. So when we define a class method, we need to call that, okay? So how we can do that? So let's take a look at this part. So you can see the variable to store the return value is in here. As you see in the previous example, you can look at the previous slide to see that what we done. And then you do have a class name in here, and then you gonna call the method by putting dot method. And if your method does have any does include any parameter or arguments, then you need to provide the name of the and the type of the parameter in here. Here is an example of that. So you're gonna say, I'm gonna declare a variable of x as a string. So the type of this variable is a string. And then you're gonna say a string dot value of one parameter, which is 12.2. So you ask the Java to return x, which is actually providing the value of 12.2. So object method. So let's take a look at the next example. So in here, you can see that we are calling method through an object which needs to be from this syntax. So you return a variable. The variable you are interested, you declare it like a string x, a string y, and then you use object. This time no class is object. Then you're gonna call the method within this object. and then parameter. So you can see this is everything is similar to the class method. The only difference is here you use the class. You don't need object. So you don't need object in here and you use the class. But in the next one, however, you are using object, no class. You just using an instance of the class. So define method in Java. How we can define a method in Java, again, is something that I'm gonna just do a quick recap on that because we went through that several times. But look at this: public static void, my method, and system.out, pretend, and something, right? So do you understand this? What is public? What is static? What is void? What is my method? And empty brackets, parentheses, and then you can see you printing something in here. So what does it mean? So I just have explanation of whatever you can see in here. Let's just quickly go through that. A method named my method is defined, right? So this is the name of the method. If you want to define a function or method, you need to use this syntax. So the name of my method or function is my method. You can see that 3 keywords: public, static, void, before name of the function or method are provided in here. So the public, as I mentioned earlier, is telling the Java that any other classes are allowed to use this method. So, and you are kind of providing access for any kind of class members to be able to use to call this method in the different classes. And then you do have a static. What does a static mean? A static keyword denotes that the method can be accessed without creating the object. So do you remember we had some method with class methods and object method? If you do have a static after the public keyword, then the method can be accessed without creating the object of the class. So you don't need to be worried about you have to have a class and then object. No, you can call the class straight away. So, and the next one, the keyword void, that you are familiar with this keyword, it's telling that this method is not gonna return any values. So when we do set that is void, then we say that is not gonna return anything. However, we're gonna look at some more examples that's gonna return something. So let's, and another thing I need to say is these empty brackets in here, or empty parentheses. So this is used as the empty arguments or parameters. So you are not passing any parameter. So this function doesn't need any input to be able to be executed, right? So let's move on. So here, I'm gonna explain that whatever you can see in here, what is called originally. So the modifier is the one that we call public or private. So define access type, whether the method in public or private are chosen. And a static, so is telling you that if I don't want to create object, so I can use static terms. And you can directly call mass.sqrt without creating an instance of mass class, right? So you can take a look at the previous example, then you're gonna see that when we need to create an object from one class to be able to call a method, or if we use the static, we don't need to create object. So return type, which was in the previous example void, telling the Java that the outcome should be null, or I'm not expecting any outcome from this function or method. And the name of the method, that it was my method, is telling that is following actually the class name, and you can provide a different name, but it's better for a method you start with the lowercase, not the capital case, not the capital letters, instead of the class name, but the rest is following the same rules and regulation in defining and naming a class. Parameter. So if you remember in the previous one, my methods empty parentheses. It means that the parameter are not passed to a method, and the method doesn't need any parameter to be passed to work, right? So, and then the last one is the method body. Whatever you're expecting this method or function does, you need to provide it in here. It can be for loop, if then else statement, some simple variable declaring, or some assigning some value to a variable or class object, whatever you prefer. So, okay, so let's look at the next one. So in here, you can see that if you do have, what is this function that we provided in the previous example, public, static, void, my method, open parentheses, and then something. So it can be in here. I want to show the location, the position of placing this function or method for your Java programming. So previously you got to know that you had the class main, and then you started like that, and we set a default value to set everything for us. So however, you can have this a structure syntax for calling. When you want to call a function or method, you use this syntax, and then your function gonna be defined after the close curly brackets. So when your main is finished, you start providing definition of your function. But then you're gonna go back and call the function. You say, okay, so I have lots of function in here after my main, and then I can call them to do something for me. So here you can see an example of the class that we already declared. So actually, while Java is executing the program code, is encounters my method in the code. The execution then branches to the my function method and executed the code inside body of the method. And after the code execution inside the method body is completed, the program returns the original state and executes the next statement. And then you need to be able by running the previous code to get this result. So you can check it always after finishing this lecture. So let's look at the next one. Well, so Java method with arguments and return value. So we look at some example that we mainly focus on the void function without any return variable, and then like empty parentheses, like without any parameter to be passed to the function or any arguments. But right now we want to have some input parameter arguments, and we do want to have some return value. Then we need to have different structure and syntax. So the return value from method. So we do have another class. We call this SQL main. So, and then we do have something in here. We said that this is our main. So just let's look at the function first, or method. Here we say public, static, no need object, int is showing is not void. Instead of void, we declare the type of value need to be returned by running this method. And then secure, and again open parentheses. There is no parameter to pass to this method. And then we're gonna say return something. What we want to return? We want to return a simple mass result, which is 10 multiplied by 10. So what's gonna be the outcome of this? We don't know. We need to call this function, a square function, within the main function method. So we say int result, we're gonna declare a variable as integer, variable of the result, and then we're going to assign something to variable of result, which is skewer. What is that? When I do want to assign something to a variable, should be some value, right? So that's why we use return. This gonna return 100, and then instead of skewer, open parentheses, here should be 100. That's it. So the next one, you can see that if you do have this function, how it's gonna be look like in whole example. So if you look at if you look at this part, so you're gonna be able to see that there is different part of the code in here. So here you gonna call the function of skewer with open parentheses, but has some return value, and gonna assign it to a variable result, right? So skewer, the function of skewer, however, does not accept any arguments because it has empty parentheses, and always return the value of 10 skewered, right? So doesn't do anything else. It's like very static and is not dynamic. But you might notice that the return type of a skewer method is of type of integer. So meaning that the return of this function should be int. So that is the keyboard that is replaced by void because we expecting this function return the skewer. So as you can see, the scope of this method is limited, as it always returns the same value. Why? Because it's not getting any input. It's empty parentheses. So how we can fix that? Let's modify the code so that instead of always returning the skewer value of 10, it returns something else, any integer which is passed to that function as an argument. So then we need to use different strategy. Let's look at this to see what is the difference in here. So yeah, I know that you realize that we do have some parameter argument in the function now is n, and we already assigned 3 to n, and then we say we call skewer n in here. Everything is the same. Again, everything is same, but here we do have a private. It means that you are not allowed to use any variable which is defined here in any other places. But doesn't matter. Look at the main difference is right now we, instead of empty parentheses, we do have the int I. We declare I as an input argument and parameter and pass it to this function. And then what's gonna be the result? Can you guess? So yeah, hopefully you can guess that what is the outcome, but the outcome gonna be 9 because it was obvious in the previous slide, if you can see 9 in here. So yeah, thank you for listening. So the next topic, we're gonna look at the file handling and the user-defined function in more detail. I'm gonna do another revision on this. And then we're gonna look at the more example about the command line based Java and then jar file and more. Thank you very much and hope see you soon.